Hello and welcome. You're watching this special broadcast on One India and Good Returns. The day has arrived when the all-important interim budget will be presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, and it's our honor to be joined by Professor Santosh Mehrotra, a senior economist. Professor Mehrotra, thank you so much for speaking to One India and Good Returns.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Sir, talking about the vast and extensive experience that you have in drafting key frameworks for vocational education and skill development in India, what are your expectations, if I may ask, in these sectors from this interim budget?
I have to say, Pankaj, that my expectations are very significant, but I fear that those expectations are unlikely to be realized because the government is far too focused on the elections. But, so at best one can tweak certain things. The biggest thing that I would expect at the current juncture is if industry could be better encouraged to engage in vocational education and training. I wouldn't necessarily expect the government to allocate more money, but at this juncture, just to allocate the littlest bit which would bring employer and industry engagement in skill development. It's not enough. Every country in the world, Brazil, China, Germany, Korea, countries which have very robust vocational education and training systems, they have very, very active employer engagement in the pre-employment training system. And in addition, they have very active apprenticeship systems. Now, despite the existence since 1961 in our country of what has been called the Apprenticeship Act, and a very welcome change or amendment in the Act carried out by this government in the last 8 or 9 years, there has been some increase from 250,000 apprentices to about 500,000 apprentices in the country. But that still is a fraction of the number of apprentices the country needs. So my ideal expectation, if you ask me, Pankaj, my ideal expectation would be, they should really make apprenticeship into a right of every young person. Because young people are not being able to join jobs and despite their and because they have very poor employability skills, because the pre-employment training is not preparing for them for the labor market, and the labor market is very tight despite an economic recovery.
Right. Absolutely. No, you're right when you say that the young workforce should be well prepared, not just mentally but also skill-wise. Do you believe, Professor Mehrotra, that, and I'm just asking you this as a curious parent also, that the apprenticeship or for that matter skill development should start somewhere from the schooling days also? Is it possible? There are lots of talks about NEPs which involved involvement of languages, but why not maybe try this capacity building program here?
No, we already have it, Pankaj, since 2014, we had made sure that when we wrote the base document of the National Skills Qualification Framework for the then Ministry of Human Resource Development, we provided for an option of vocational education course being taken up by a youngster who makes the transition into secondary, meaning into class 9. So 9, 10, 11, 12, you have had for the last 9 years vocational education option. My ask would be of the government that it should become a stream. What is that? What is the stream? For instance, in China, vocational is a stream, while general academic is an alternative stream. So after
Okay.
completing, so for instance, after completing 9 years of general academic compulsory education in China, children take an exam, and then half of them get streamed into vocational and half remain in the general academic. And believe it or not, believe it or not, the vocational children actually receive a stipend, which the general academics do not when they enter the senior secondary. So in other words, the vocational is actually incentivized. That's why they have such a skilled labor force, Pankaj. It's very important for our government to recognize that our younger, I think the Asar report has every year repeatedly informed us that our children are not learning enough. And therefore, if they are poorly skilled as well, then why do you expect them to be employable? It's absolutely critical that we begin to offer them a stream, and we bring employers into the school system. So it's not that we don't have it. So 20,000 schools at the secondary level already have it. But it's not of the quality that we want, because we will get quality only with employers engaging.
True. You're right. I mean, those skill development centers that popped all across the country. I mean, we saw a lot of them in Delhi as well, and still need to go back on the drawing board and see what results it has fetched. Talking about, this was the job aspect of it and employability. Talking about poverty alleviation. Now, this is something that has been finding its mention again and again since the time I started watching the budget and started understanding it a little bit. ये गरीबी हटाओ वाली जो एक बात हमेशा आती है. What is your view on the poverty alleviation strategies that the government has employed or plans to employ maybe in the rural and extremist infested areas?
You see, the one thing that will alleviate poverty is new non-farm jobs. In the rural areas, there are far too million young people who have gotten better educated, and they are still stuck in rural areas and still stuck in working in agriculture when that's not their first preference. Young girls have also all gotten much better educated, and their expectation is that they will move out of their rural homes into urban locations, into jobs, into services and industry. However, non-farm jobs have not been growing. Would you believe it, Pankaj, that in the last 3 years, beginning April of 2020, 60 million workers were added to agriculture within the last 3.5 years. The periodic labor force survey of the government itself shows this beyond a shadow of doubt. The share of agriculture in total employment has actually gone up instead of coming down. This is the opposite of the structural change we want to see in the economy. Please remember that from 2004 to 19, absolute numbers in agriculture were falling. What we've seen is the opposite happening in the last 3.5 years. And therefore, you can alleviate poverty in the rural areas only by pulling workers out of agriculture into non-farm jobs. And those non-farm jobs are not growing at anywhere required, or the rate required, because 50 to 60, so 5 to 6 million young people join the labor force every year. In addition, there are millions to be pulled out of agriculture. In addition, there are the stock of unemployed of about 37, 38 million. So you are not going to get rural demand growing in the absence of non-farm job creation, because only then will real wages begin to increase. I have shown in my recent work that real wages have actually stagnated in the last 6 years. So how do you expect poverty to decline? The reason why poverty fell very dramatically, I'm talking about income poverty, it fell dramatically between 2004 and 14 by 140 million people rising above the poverty line.
What was the
what the reasons were essentially twofold. One was non-farm jobs growing very fast, especially in construction. Workers were pulled out of agriculture. The absolute number of workers in agriculture began falling for the first time in India's history. And because of that, the labor market in rural areas tightened, partly also because Manrega raised demand for work in rural areas, so that also raised incomes. So labor market in rural areas tightened, that raised open market wages. It raised open market wages. And that had a knock-on effect on open market wages in urban areas. So the combination of new non-farm jobs and the rise in rural wages across the rise in wages across the economy, rural and urban, that's the reason why poverty fell in such dramatic terms. Income poverty fell in dramatic terms. We've had neither of the two trends showing up in the last six or 7 years.
Well, that's a critical aspect, I would say, that has been amiss. And I'm sure, the policymakers and those who would be taking a close look at it must factor this also. Professor Mehrotra, in the beginning, you rightly mentioned that elections are around the corner. And my final question to you would be, time and again, 5 years, we have these Lok Sabha elections, and a lot is, on the stakes, as they say, are very high each time. Where to from here? I mean, there are lots of things, there are lots of boxes to be checked. But if I had to ask you 3 crucial aspects that the government must focus on, what would you list them?
See, Pankaj, we are at a very crucial juncture in the evolution of the Indian economy. I don't think it is recognized sufficiently in government that for our demographic dividend to be realized, for us to take advantage of this once-in-a-century opportunity, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in the life of our nation, of the dividend, which can actually raise incomes if we provide jobs. I don't think this is sufficiently recognized. So which means the topmost priority has to be that total investment to GDP ratio rises. That's what creates new jobs. Now, the unfortunate part is that this government inherited a investment to GDP ratio of 31% in 2013-14. In the last 10 years, in no fiscal year has the investment to GDP ratio reached the level of 31%. It actually fell all the way to 26%. It is now increased to 29.4%. So that's not good enough. You can see that capacity utilization in the industry is now around in the region of 74%. That's not still good enough for new investment, private investment to happen. So government is trying to stand in for private investment. It cannot suffice because it's most of the investment in the economy is the private sector. And FDI is in the last analysis, despite the gross numbers, the fact of the matter is that in none of the 10 years of this government, the FDI to GDP ratio has exceeded 2% in none of the years. So absolute numbers don't matter so much when the economy is already quite large. What matters is how much is FDI as a proportion of total investment. And then it must be in new greenfield sites, not in brownfield sites, meaning, they take over existing firms. That's the other
Right.
problem. So you have two levels of problem, and another side of this capital flow is that Indian investors not finding the opportunities within India are taking money abroad. They are investing abroad. So there is net. So
Right.
the net FDI is into India is not as much as is made out from the gross FDI number that the government spokespersons normally talk about.
Right. Well, definitely, it's a tightrope walk, I would say. And needless to say, for factors such as these, as you mentioned, more than just a cursory glance on this budget as an interim budget would be required. Professor Santosh Mehrotra, thank you so much for speaking to us, sir. Lovely learning from you, lovely hearing you. And we wish you all the very best. I think in a short while from now, the budget would be on. So thank you so much for
Thank you
speaking to
very
us.
much, Pankaj. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.